This signature gives the association every right to fine you, and you will pay. Or we will put a lien on the house your wife died in. That was Delia Frost, president of the Cedar Hollow Owners Association for 9 years running, standing on my gravel drive on a Tuesday morning in March, holding up a photocopy of a covenant amendment like it was a search warrant. She had her husband's development sign already staked at the corner of the road. She had a clipboard. She had a fine schedule she said went back 4 years. What she did not have, and what she never once thought to check, was whether the signature she kept waving at me was real. My name is Sam Pruitt. I am 62 years old, and for 31 years I examined questioned documents for a living. Forged checks, altered wills, ransom notes, contracts that grew a clause overnight. I read ink the way other men read weather. I retired to 11 acres on the high side of Cedar Hollow, Colorado, 3 years after I buried my wife, Carol, in the ground she loved. And I kept every piece of paper that woman ever touched, because paper was the last warm thing of hers I had left. So when Delia held up that amendment and told me the loops and the slant proved I owed her 4 years of fines, I did not argue. I just looked at the signature. And I knew, the way you know your own front door in the dark, that the hand that wrote it had never met the man whose name it spelled. What would you have done, standing on your own gravel, holding a coffee mug, listening to a woman tell you that a piece of paper she had never verified was going to take the house your wife died in? I want you to sit with that, because I sat with it for the better part of 2 years before I ever said the word forgery out loud. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is where she made her first mistake. And she made it before I ever opened my mouth. I bought the 11 acres in the spring of 2009. Carol and I had spent 20 years in Denver, raising our daughter and saving every dollar we could pry loose. And the plan was always the mountains. We found the parcel on the high side of the hollow, above where the new houses would eventually crowd in. And we paid cash for the dirt and built the house ourselves over 4 summers. Carol painted the trim. She planted the aspens along the drive with her own hands, 11 of them, 1 for each acre. And she used to say that when they were tall enough to throw shade on the porch, we would know we had stayed long enough to belong. She got sick in the winter of 2018, and she was gone by the following fall. The aspens were not tall enough yet. I stayed anyway. I had nowhere else I wanted to be, and I had a daughter who came up on weekends. And after a while, it was just me and the trees and the quiet and the boxes of Carol's things I could not bring myself to sort. I want to tell you about the boxes, because they matter more than I knew at the time. Carol had been on the original Cedar Hollow board, back when the development was nothing but a dozen lots and a dirt road and a hand-drawn plat tacked to the wall of a borrowed cabin. She kept minutes in a spiral notebook with a coffee ring on the cover. She kept the founding documents. She kept the original covenants, signed in 2006 by the 7 founding owners, in a manila folder she labeled in her own round hand. The same round hand she used on the grocery lists I kept finding in coat pockets for a year after she died. Across the tab of that folder, she had written 1 word and underlined it twice. Founding. That was Carol. She underlined the things that mattered so I would not miss them. And she was usually right about what mattered. After she passed, I put that folder in a fireproof box in the closet, under a quilt her mother had made. And I did not look at it again for 2 years. I knew it was there the way you know the load-bearing wall is there. You do not stare at it. You just build your house around it and trust it to hold. I am telling you this now so you understand that the thing that saved my house was sitting in my closet the whole time, waiting in the handwriting of the woman it would eventually avenge. I walked past that closet door every single morning for 2 years and never once understood that I was walking past the answer. Delia Frost moved into Cedar Hollow in 2015. By then, the development had grown from a dozen lots to over 90, and the dirt road was paved, and the founding owners had mostly sold out and moved on. Delia ran for board president on a platform of property values and aesthetic harmony, and she won because nobody else wanted the job, and she wanted it very badly. Her husband, Roy Frost, ran an outfit called Frost Ridge Development. I did not know that mattered yet. At the time, he was just the quiet man in the polo shirt who stood behind her at the annual meeting and never said a word. The first notice came in the spring of 2021. It was a single sheet taped to my gate, informing me that my property was in violation of Covenant Section 4, Paragraph 2, regarding unapproved structures, and that I had 30 days to remove the offending item or face a fine of $200. The offending item was my late wife's potting shed, a 6x8 cedar box she had built with her own drill, standing where it had stood since 2011. I walked down to the next board meeting with a level head. The meeting was in the clubhouse the association had built, where the old dirt road used to fork. A beige room with stacking chairs and a coffee urn that never worked. And Delia ran it from behind a folding table with a gavel she had bought herself. I waited my turn in the open comment period, and when she called my lot number, I stood up and kept my voice flat. I told her the shed predated her tenure by a decade, that Carol had built it in 2011, that it sat well inside my own boundary, and that I would be happy to bring down the original covenants and show her exactly what was and was not allowed up here if there was any confusion. She smiled at me the way you smile at a slow child. She set the gavel down so she could fold her hands. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "the association has standards now. Whatever was tolerated before my time is not the standard going forward. I understand you have had a hard couple of years, but sentiment is not a variance. The shed comes down, or the fine stands." Behind her, Roy Frost looked at his phone. A woman 2 seats down from me, who I would later learn was Ruth Kessler, stared at her own hands like she had heard that exact tone aimed at her own property. I went home, and I did not take the shed down, and I did not pay the fine. Instead, I did the only thing I have ever known how to do when a piece of paper makes a claim. I sat at Carol's kitchen table, and I opened a fresh folder, and I started to keep a record. That was Incident 1. I wrote the date, the section cited, the amount demanded, and Delia's exact words, and I put it in a fresh manila folder, and I labeled it the way Carol would have. Cedar Hollow. I did not know yet that I would need 11 more pages before it was over. The second notice came that summer, on a Tuesday, taped to my gate while I was in town buying chicken feed. A different paragraph this time, regarding the color of my front door, which Carol had painted a deep barn red in 2012 with a brush she cleaned and kept, and which I still have. Delia's new architectural standards now classified that red as non-conforming, too saturated, out of harmony with the approved palette. $300. I stood at the gate and read it twice, and then I drove the rest of the way up to the house and looked at the door my wife had painted, and I went inside and filed the notice under the first one. The hand stayed steady. I made sure of it. The third came in the fall, regarding the aspens. Carol's 11 aspens, the ones she planted by hand the first autumn we owned the dirt, the ones she said would tell us when we had belonged long enough, were apparently in violation of a setback rule that had not existed when she planted them. $400, and an instruction to remove the 3 nearest the road within 30 days. I walked the row of them that evening with the notice in my pocket. They were past my shoulder by then, slender and silver-barked, their leaves doing the thing aspen leaves do, where the whole tree seems to shiver at a breath of wind. I filed that one too, and I will admit my hand was not as steady writing it as it had been the first 2 times. I wrote the date. I wrote the amount. And under the amount, for the first time, I wrote 3 words I did not yet have the proof for. Check the signature. By the spring of 2022, I had a stack, 6 notices, 6 fines, escalating by $100 each time, every one of them taped to my gate on a Tuesday, because Delia did her enforcement rounds on Tuesdays in a white golf cart with the association logo on the side. I came to know the whine of that cart in the way you know a wasp in the room before you see it. Here is what I had not told anyone yet, and what I will tell you now, because you have stayed with me this far. I had read every one of those notices the way I read everything, which is to say, I had looked at the document and not just the words. And on the 4th notice, the one about the aspens, Delia had stapled a copy of the covenant amendment she said gave the board the power to fine. It was the first time I'd seen it. And the signature at the bottom, the signature of the founding board secretary, who had supposedly authorized the amendment in 2006, was wrong. I knew it was wrong the way I knew 100 forgeries before it. The pen pressure was even where it should have wavered. The capital letters were drawn, not written, the way a forger draws a shape he is copying instead of writing a name he owns. The slant was consistent to a degree no human hand produces under the speed of a real signature. Somebody had sat down with a sample and copied it, slowly, carefully, and badly, the way amateurs always do when they think careful is the same as convincing. I did not say a word, though, because a forgery is not proof until you can show the hand that made it and the hand it pretended to be, side by side, in front of someone whose recognition matters. And I did not yet have the original. I thought I did. I thought it was in Carol's box. So that night, I went into the closet, and I opened the fireproof box, and I started to look. It took me 3 weeks to be sure of what I was holding, and I did it the way I had done it for 31 years, slowly, under a lamp, with a loop and a ruler, and no opinion I had not earned. Carol's folder held the original 2006 covenants, signed in wet ink by all 7 founding owners. I laid them out on the kitchen table under the work lamp I had clamped to the back of a chair, and I went down the row of signatures, one at a time. 6 of them meant nothing to my case. The 7th was the founding board secretary, a man named Walt Hennings, who had died in 2019 and whose name was the one forged on Delia's amendment. Walt's real signature was right there, on the founding document, in his own genuine hand. I had Delia's stapled amendment beside it, and the 2 did not match. Not the slant, not the pressure. A real signature is a motor habit, a thing the hand does 1,000 times until it stops being writing and becomes a gesture, and it speeds up and lightens at the same places every time. The amendment did none of that. It plodded. It pressed evenly all the way through, the way you press when you are copying a shape and not signing your own name. And then there was the G. Walt closed his lowercase g with a tail that curled left every time, on every signature in the founding document. On the forgery, the tail curled right, the way a right-handed forger curls it when he stops thinking about the man he is imitating and lets his own hand take over for half a second. That little rightward tail was a confession. The forger had signed his own habit into another man's name. I sat back from the table and I let it land. The amendment that gave the Cedar Hollow Board the power to fine anyone for anything had been signed by a dead man's forged hand, and every fine Delia Frost had ever sent, to me and to every other owner in that development, hung from that one forged signature like a porch from a single rotten beam. pull the beam, and the whole structure came down. I just had to pull it in the right room. I want to be careful here, because this is the moment I could have walked down the hill and ended it in an afternoon. And I did not. And I want you to understand why. A document examiner does not get to be right out loud. He gets to be right on paper, in front of an authority, with both samples in hand and a method anyone can follow. If I had marched into that meeting in 2022 waving Carol's folder, Delia would have called me a grieving old man making things up, and her husband's lawyer would have buried the original in a discovery fight for 2 years, and I would have spent Carol's memory on a shouting match. So I did the patient thing. I kept filing, and I started to find out why a woman would forge a dead man's name to fine her neighbors over barn red doors. That is when Roy Frost stopped being the quiet man in the polo shirt. It was my neighbor Tom Beck who first put the pieces in my hand. Tom ran cattle on the parcel below mine, 60 head on 40 acres. And he had been getting notices too. His were about his fence line, which the association suddenly claimed encroached on a common easement that, as far as Tom knew, had never existed. One evening in the summer of 2022, Tom came up the hill in his old flatbed with a beer in each hand and a survey map rolled under his arm. And he set the beers on my tailgate and spread the map out flat and weighted the corners with 2 fence staples and a spark plug from his pocket. "Sam," he said, "look where the easement they want runs. Just look at it. Don't let me tell you what I think it is. Look at it and tell me." I looked. The easement the board was trying to carve out of Tom's fence line ran in a straight line from the county road, across Tom's pasture, up past my aspens, to the high meadow above my house. It did not connect anything to anything that needed connecting. It did not serve a single existing lot. It went from the pavement to the empty meadow and stopped. "That is not an easement," I said. "That is a road." "That is a road," Tom agreed. He took a long pull on his beer. "Now ask me who owns the meadow." "Who owns the meadow, Tom?" He grinned without any humor in it at all. "Frost Ridge Development. Roy bought it in 2020. He has been trying to get road access for 2 years. County keeps telling him no, because the only legal route crosses deeded lots, yours and mine and Ruth Kessler's, and none of us will sell him the easement." He tapped the map twice, right over my aspens. "So now, all of a sudden, the association needs an easement. For the common good. Funny how the common good runs exactly where Roy's bulldozers want to drive." There it was. The barn red door, the potting shed, Carol's aspens, Tom's fence. None of it was about standards. It was about pressure. Delia was using the fine schedule, propped up on that forged amendment, to grind down every owner whose land sat between Roy's development company and the meadow he could not legally reach. Fine them enough, line them enough, make ownership painful enough, and eventually somebody sells. Somebody grants the easement, and Frost Ridge builds 40 houses on the high meadow and a paved road right past the aspens my wife planted with her hands. I added Tom's survey to the folder. That was Incident 7. And for the first time, I understood that the careful thing and the patient thing were no longer the same thing. Because now there was a clock, and the clock was Roy's Road. The fines kept coming through 2022 and into 2023. By then, Delia had stopped taping them to the gate and started sending them certified. With the association's lawyer CC'd, a man named Bradley Voss, who signed his letters with a flourish that told me he had never doubted anything in his life. The amounts had climbed to $1,000 a notice. The total she claimed I owed had crossed $9,000, and in the spring of 2023 she filed the first lien against my property, against the house Carol died in, exactly as she had promised, on my gravel drive. My daughter Nora was the one who found the lien notice in my mail when she came up that weekend. Nora is 26 now, but I still see the 8-year-old who used to fall asleep in the truck on the drive up, her cheek against the window, her hand still holding half a sandwich. She was standing at the counter, sorting my mail into the piles she always made, bills and not bills. And she went still over one envelope. She read the lien notice twice, and then she set it on the kitchen table very carefully, the way you set down something hot. And she pressed it flat with 2 fingers like it might lift off. "Dad," she said, "they can take the house, over a door, over Mom's trees." Her voice did the thing it did when she was little and trying not to cry in front of me. The small catch in the middle of the sentence she thought I could not hear. I put my hand over hers on the table. "They are not going to take the house," I said. "They built the whole thing on a lie, and I can prove it. And when I prove it the right way, in front of the right people, it all comes down at once." "That is what you always say. The right way. The right room." She turned her hand over under mine so we were palm to palm. "How much longer is the right way going to take, Dad? Because the lien is real. The lien is on the house now." "I need a little more rope," I said. "More rope for who?" "For her," I said, "until she does something she cannot take back." Nora looked at me for a long moment, and then she nodded, because she is Carol's daughter, and Carol taught us both that the patient thing and the right thing are usually the same thing wearing different clothes. "Okay," she said. "But you call me the day she does it, whatever it is. You call me." I did not have to wait long. That fall, in October of 2023, I came home from town to find 2 men in my high meadow with a transit and a roll of survey flags, and a third man kneeling at the top of my drive with a pair of bolt cutters, working the lock off the access gate Carol and I had installed in 2013. I heard the cart before I saw any of it. Then I came around the last bend in the drive, and there it was. They were not from the county. They were wearing Frost Ridge development vests, orange and new. And the third man stood up with my lock in 2 pieces in his hand and dropped it in the gravel like it was nothing, like it was trash, like it was not the lock my wife and I had picked out together at the hardware store in town. They had a work order signed by Delia Frost in her capacity as association president, authorizing survey access across my deeded land under the easement provision of the Covenant Amendment. The forged one. They had cut my gate and walked onto my land on the authority of a signature that belonged to a dead man who never wrote it. I did not yell. I have never yelled at the moment it mattered, because yelling is what they expect from a man who has run out of paper. And I had a closet full of paper. I got out of the truck. I picked the 2 halves of my lockup out of the gravel and put them in my coat pocket, because a cut lock is evidence, and evidence goes in the folder. Then I took out my phone and I photographed everything. The cut gate, the work order in the foreman's hand, close enough to read the signature, the men, the flags in my meadow, the vests, the Frost Ridge truck parked sideways across my own gate. I photographed the recording sticker still bolted to the gate post from 2013, the one that said this was a recorded gate on a deeded line. The foreman watched me do it and did not stop me. "We got authorization, mister," he said. "Take all the pictures you want." "I intend to," I said. Then I called the sheriff's office, and I asked calmly for a deputy to come document a trespass and a destruction of property on deeded land. The deputy who came was a young man named Cole Raymer, and he was careful and tired and clearly did not want to be in the middle of an HOA fight. He looked at the cut lock, and he looked at the work order. And he said the thing that officers always say, the thing I needed him to say so that you would understand. It is not corruption when a deputy hesitates. "Mr. Pruitt," They've got a signed authorization here citing a recorded covenant. If this easement's on the books, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. I can take your statement. But I can't arrest a man for crossing an easement his paperwork says exists. I understand, I said, and I did. What would change that? He thought about it. If the document they're standing on turned out to be fraudulent, that's a different animal. That's forgery, and that's criminal trespass. But you'd have to prove the document's bad, and you'd have to prove it to someone with the authority to say so. Not me. I just write what I see. Then write what you see, I said. Write that they cut a recorded gate. Write the work order number. Write that I disputed the easement on the record. On this date. I had him photograph Carol's gate, the original one, with the recording sticker still on the post from 2013. He did. He gave me a case number. And he told me, almost gently, that if I had a real challenge to the document, the place to bring it was the county, because the amendment was recorded with the clerk. And a recorded instrument could be challenged in front of the recorder and a judge. That was Incident 11, and it was the one I had been waiting 2 years for. Because Delia Frost had finally put her forged signature to work in the physical world, on my land, in front of a uniform with a case number attached. She had stopped sending paper and started cutting locks. She could not take that back. I spent that winter building the case the way I used to build them for court. I am going to tell you exactly what I did, not to brag, but because this is the part you can use. First, I had Carol's original 2006 covenants professionally authenticated, even though I knew they were genuine, because a man cannot be his own expert witness in a fight he is a party to. I sent them to a former colleague, a document examiner named Priya Shah, who still took referral work. And I sent her a certified copy of Delia's recorded amendment alongside. And I asked her one question. Same hand or not? Her report came back in February. Walt Henning's genuine signature on the 2006 founding document and the Walt Henning signature on the 2006 amendment were not written by the same person. The amendment signatures showed the classic markers of simulation. Tremor at the line starts, even pen pressure where natural writing accelerates and lightens, and a reversed terminal stroke on the lowercase letters. Her conclusion was unqualified. The amendment was a forgery, and given that it was dated 3 days after Walt Hennings entered hospice care 2 counties away, it was a forgery the real man could not physically have produced. Second, I pulled the recording history of the amendment from the county clerk. It had been recorded in 2019, 13 years after its supposed signing date, and 4 days after Walt Hennings died. Somebody had held a forged 2006 document until the only man who could deny signing it was in the ground, and then recorded it to give the board its fine power. The recording stamp told the whole story to anyone who knew to read a date. Third, I went to the neighbors. I did not do it from a porch with a bullhorn. I did it the way I do everything, one kitchen table at a time. Tom Beck, who already knew. The Alvarez family, who had been fined $800 over a flagpole they had put up for their son who was overseas. And old Ruth Kessler, whose fines had crossed $12,000 and who had nearly sold her place to Frost Ridge that very spring out of pure exhaustion. Because a widow on a fixed income cannot fight a $1,000 certified letter every month forever. I did not ask any of them to trust me. Trust is not evidence either. I laid Priya's report on each of their tables, and I laid the recording history beside it, and I let them read the dates for themselves. I asked them to come to the county recorder's open hearing in April, the one where a recorded instrument could be formally challenged, and to bring every fine notice they had ever been sent. Every one of them said yes. Ruth Kessler held the report in both hands and read it twice, the way Nora had read the lien, her lips moving over the conclusion. When she looked up, her eyes were wet and furious at the same time, which is a hard thing to watch on a woman who has been polite her whole life. 13 years, she said. It sat in that drawer at the county 13 years. And that woman fined me out of my savings on a piece of paper a dead man never signed. She set the report down and smoothed it flat. What time is the hearing? I will be early. I want to tell you about the morning of the hearing, because it is the only part of this story I would not trade. It was a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. The county recorder's office had a hearing room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs, and by 9 in the morning it was full, because word travels in a hollow, and half of Cedar Hollow had come to watch. Delia Frost sat in the front row in a cream blazer with her clipboard on her knees and her lawyer Bradley Voss beside her. And Roy Frost sat behind them in his polo shirt, quiet the way he had always been quiet, the way a man is quiet when he has always let his wife carry the thing in front while he stands behind it. The recorder was a woman named Frances Dunn, who had held the office for 20 years and had a face like a closed ledger. She called the challenge to the recorded amendment. Bradley Voss stood up and gave a speech about how the amendment had been recorded for years, how the challenge was the work of a disgruntled owner with unpaid fines, how the board had acted in good faith on a valid instrument. He sat down satisfied. Then I stood up. I did not give a speech. I have never won anything with a speech, and I was not about to start with my wife's folder in my hands. I walked to the table and I laid 2 documents in front of Frances Dunn, side by side, where the light from the window was good and even. The genuine 2006 covenants from Carol's folder, with Walt Henning's real signature, and a certified copy of the recorded amendment with the forged one. I laid Priya Shah's authentication report on top of both. I did not point. I did not raise my voice. I said only what was true. These 2 signatures claim to be the same man's hand, I said. They are not. The report explains the markers, the slant, the pen pressure, the terminal strokes, and the recording date explains the rest. This amendment claims it was signed in 2006. It was not recorded until 2019. 13 years later, 4 days after the man who supposedly signed it had died. I have attached his death certificate. You can read the dates yourself. Frances Dunn put on her glasses. She looked at the 2 signatures for a long time, longer than I expected, the way a person looks when they already see it and are making sure. The room was so quiet, I could hear the fluorescent lights hum and somebody's chair creak in the back. She picked up the report and read the conclusion. Then she looked at the recording stamp on the amendment, and then at the death date on the certificate, and then back at the 2 signatures one more time, and I watched her eyes go from one lowercase g to the other. She set them down. She took off her glasses and folded them, and she looked at Bradley Voss and said, "Counselor, your instrument was recorded 4 days after the signatory's death, and it does not survive examination. I am referring this matter to the district attorney. As of this moment, the recorded amendment is flagged as disputed, and any enforcement action resting on it is void pending criminal review." I heard Ruth Kessler exhale behind me, like she had been holding her breath for 13 years. Here is the part I had waited 2 years to be able to say, without saying it. Delia Frost had sent, by my count, 11 fines to my property, totaling $9,400, and had collected exactly 0. Carol's folder held 7 genuine signatures, recorded in 2006, that had sat untouched and true for 18 years. 11 forged fines against 0 collected. 18 years of genuine ink against 4 days too late. The gap was the whole story, and I did not have to point at it. Frances Dunn had already seen it. Delia stood up. For 9 years, she had never once been told no by anyone in that hollow. And you could see it cross her face like weather. The moment the authority she had performed for 9 years turned out to have been built on a beam that was never there. "This is absurd," she said. "That document is valid. My secretary signed it. I have the original." 3 voiced lies, the last 3 she would get to tell in that room. And Bradley Voss put his hand on her arm to stop her, because a lawyer knows the sound of a client digging. "The signatory entered hospice on the 2nd, Frances Dunn said, and died on the 5th. The amendment is dated the 4th. Sit down, Mrs. Frost." She sat down. The district attorney's review took the rest of the year, but the road was already dead the moment Frances Dunn flagged the amendment. Without the amendment, the association had no easement. And without the easement, Frost Ridge Development had no legal route to the high meadow. And the 40 houses Roy had been planning for 4 years never broke ground. The county sent Roy the same letter they had been sending him since 2020. The one that said no legal access exists, except now there was no forged document left to argue around. The thing Delia had tried to take, the access across my deeded land, was the exact thing she lost, and she lost it because she had forged the very document she needed to take it. A man cannot build a road on a signature that puts its forger in front of a grand jury. The meadow above my house is still empty. Carol's aspens still stand along the drive, all 11 of them. And last summer, the 3 nearest the road, the 3 Delia ordered me to cut, finally grew tall enough to throw shade on the porch. Carol said we would know we had stayed long enough to belong when that happened. I sat in that shade most of the summer. Delia Frost resigned the presidency before the DA filed. In a 1-paragraph letter, the new board read aloud at the next meeting to a room that did not make a sound. The board, what was left of it, voided every fine recorded under the amendment, all of them, going back to the day it was recorded. They refunded what little had been collected from the handful of owners who had paid out of fear. Ruth Kessler got her $12,000 back in a county check, and she framed the check stub and hung it in her kitchen next to a photograph of her late husband. And she told me she looks at it every morning while the coffee brews. Roy Frost sold the High Meadow parcel at a loss to a land trust that has a conservation easement on it now, a real one, recorded with a real signature, which means that meadow will never be paved as long as the county keeps records. Bradley Voss stopped signing his letters with a flourish. The last one I got from him, withdrawing the lien, he signed so small I could barely read it. Nora came up the weekend after the hearing. We sat on the porch in the new shade of Carol's aspens, and she had the lien notice in her hand, the one that had scared her so badly the year before, and she asked me what to do with it. I told her to put it in the folder. Not to burn it, to file it, because the folder was the whole point. She put her head on my shoulder, and we watched the light come down the meadow that would stay a meadow. And she said, "Mom would have liked the part where you didn't yell." "Your mother taught me not to," I said. "She kept the minutes. I just kept the folder." That is the end of the story. Here is the part that is for you. If you take one thing from an old man who reads ink for a living, take this. The people who perform authority almost never verify the thing their authority rests on, because performing it has always been enough. So verify it for them. When a board, an association, or any clipboard tells you that a document gives them power over your land, do not argue about the power. Ask to see the document, then read the document and not just the words. Pull the recording history at the county clerk, which is public and costs you almost nothing. Check the dates against the world. Keep the originals your family left you, because the thing that saves your house may already be in a box in your closet, in the handwriting of someone who loved you. Do not pay a fine you have not verified the authority for, and do not let anyone rush you off the patient path, because the patient path, walked all the way to the right room, beats the loudest voice in the hollow every single time. Build the folder, keep the originals, read the dates, and when they hand you the paper that is supposed to scare you, turn it over and read it like your home depends on it, because one day it might. If a clipboard ever tried to take something that was yours, tell me about it in the comments, because I read every one. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one. Next time, I will tell you about the retired county surveyor whose HOA tried to move a property line 40 feet to swallow a boat dock, and what happened when he unrolled the original 1971 plat on the hood of the board president's own car. Until then, keep your records and walk your lines.